Good morning, everybody joining us today. Welcome to our webinar, which is episode 2 of our Lightning Web Component series. We're going to talk about working with Salesforce data today. And I'm joined today by Satya Shekhar, who's a Senior Developer Evangelist. Hi, Satya.
Hi, Shashank.
And I'm Shashank. Like Satya said, I lead the developer relations for Asia Pacific. And let's go into this. But before that, let me tell you that during this presentation, we might make some forward-looking statements about features that are not yet generally available. So don't make any purchasing decisions based on what we're going to discuss today. With that said, we're all up for social. Please feel free to tweet us out on @SalesforceDevs and find us on Facebook and LinkedIn at Salesforce Developers. And also, you can also check out all our amazing YouTube video content on our Salesforce Developers YouTube channel. Anybody can just access it. And please also note that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be posted on the same URL that you used for the registration, and you can find them soon after the webinar concludes. With that said, let me just take a little more of housekeeping information and then go into content for the day. So you might have questions about the content that is being presented, and that's the whole idea of a live webinar where you get to ask questions. So please feel free to post your questions in the GoToWebinar questions tab. You don't have to wait till the end. You can just post the question as you get it. And what we'll do is towards the end, we'll do a live Q&A section where we'll try to answer as many questions of yours as possible. And in case we don't get to your question, you can always still go to our developer forums and post your questions there as well. With that said, Satya, so can you just give us a recap of what happened in episode 1 before we move on?
Sure, Shashank. So as you all know, in episode 1 of our Lightning Web Components webinar series, we talked about the introduction of the Lightning Web Components and why do we need Lightning Web Components there. Then we also talked about the sample gallery, or we use the recipes app from the sample gallery a lot, even in our first episode and in the upcoming episodes as well. We also talked about the component library and playground, where we can quickly check the prototype of our Lightning Web Components. And we also saw how to use the component library to view the base Lightning Components code, which works like examples for us if you want to use it in any of our Lightning Web Components development. Then we also talked about the developer tooling, where we talked about Salesforce CLI and talked about the benefits of using the VS Code for our Lightning Web Components development.
Okay, that's great. So I can't wait to hear about what we have in store for today's episode 2. What do we have?
Yeah, Shashank, for today's episode, we are going to talk a lot about how we can access the data from the Salesforce. There are different ways in which we can access the data. Again, each comes with its own benefits and its own set of purpose. So we'll start talking about base Lightning Components, which uses the Lightning Data Service to get the data from the Salesforce org. Then we'll talk about how to use the wire service. This is the new term for most of the people there. So we'll see how to use the wire service to get the data, which in turn uses the Lightning Data Service and the UI API. And we'll also see how we can call the Apex methods using the same wire service. Then we'll also see how, if we want to call the Apex methods directly or imperatively, we'll also see how we can do that. And finally, we'll see how we can compose the pages using our Lightning Web Components, which we are going to develop.
Great, can't wait to see more, Satya. So there's definitely so many ways of doing these things. My favorite way is the Lightning Data Service. So can you maybe just give us a quick summary of how it works?
Sure. So I will divide the communication between the Lightning Web Components and the Salesforce in 2 different contexts. One is browser, where exactly our Lightning Web Components works, right? And server is where our SObjects lies. So we want to get the data from the server. In that case, Lightning Web Components talks to the Lightning Data Service to get the data. The benefit of using the Lightning Data Service is when we make a request to the server, the lighting, or when we want to get the data in any of our lighting web components, the lighting data service will give one request to the server and get the complete record data. And there may be many components on the same page which are referring to the same record data. In that case, lighting data service takes care of giving the data to all of the lighting web components there. And it also caches the data so that there will not be too many server calls. So if you get a new request for the same data, it's not going to send out a request to the server. In that case, it's going to only return the data from the cache. And if there is any change in any of the components, if some data is changed in one of the component, the change is propagated to all other components which are referring to the same record. It's all handled by the Lightning Data Service again. And not only that, Shashank, it in fact optimizes the server calls. So when we make a request to the server, it sees if it can be bulkified. It's all done by the Lightning Data Service. And then it also detubes the request. It will not send the request again if it's already sent once. And this Lightning Data Service heavily relies on the user interface API to get the data from the S objects. Again, when we use user interface API, as the name suggests, user interface API is devised by Salesforce to develop your user interfaces. So the benefit of using the user interface API is it gets the metadata and also the data in a single response. You need not make too many calls. Maybe in a page, if you're using, like, if you're rendering a component which refers to the different metadata and also different data, in that case, is all handled by the user interface API. And not only that, when it gets the data, it also respects the CRED permissions of the records. So you'll be able to see only the data for which you have the permission. Right, and it takes care of the field level security and all other sharing settings while it retrieves the data from the server.
Absolutely great. Now, what is the easiest way of using the Lightning Data Service?
Yeah, so when we started our episode today, I said like there are different ways of accessing the data from the server there. The first best way would be to use the base Lightning components. So if you have a scenario where you want to get the data from the server, so first you check if there is any base Lightning component available for you to serve your purpose. In that case, we'll use the base Lightning components. As I said earlier, base Lightning components uses the Lightning Data Service, right? So we have all the benefits out of the Lightning Data Service there. Then this is one of the base Lightning components, Lightning Record Form, which was introduced in winter 18, which can be used to edit the record, view the record, all the operations that you want to do on a single record can be done using the Lightning Record Form. But there are other ways of getting the record as well. We have one called as a record view form, which was introduced earlier, which can be used only for the purpose of viewing the records there. And you have Lightning Record Edit Form as well, which can be used for the purpose of getting the record and editing the record as well. So what are the benefits of using these base Lightning components? As I said, the first thing is it is metadata aware, so you need not really worry about what is the data type of each of the fields that you are getting and what are the validation rules and other stuff. And most importantly, when you are using the base Lightning components, you need not write any Apex code. So what we do is we only use the markup, and within the markup we specify what kind of data we want. And then you also need not really worry about the layout of your form. It's all again handled by the Lightning Record Form itself. It provides a layout, default layout, in which you can see your records. And the field labels also are populated based on the aux defaults. And as I said in the earlier slide, it is built on Lightning Data Service, and it completely leverages the benefits of both LDS as well as UI API. And one more important thing is when we access the data from the model, you can do it either in a statical way, or you can also access the data dynamically. When I say accessing the data statically, you're going to mention about each of the fields which you want to retrieve for that particular record. And then when you do that, so it is going to maintain a referential integrity with the server. That means what? If there is a change in the server, someone changes the name of the field there, that will automatically be reflected in your record form here. So dynamic static way is the best way, of getting the records. Again, not only that, if someone accidentally tries to delete the field on the server side, it doesn't allow because your Lightning Web Component is using that.
Yeah,
But
there's a big list of benefits here.
yeah, in fact, there's a very big list. But again, if you want to have some flexible coding, which you can write quickly, you can directly list the fields using the dynamical way of accessing the data from the model.
Yeah, this is great. There are so many components also to choose from. And let's say if you look at these three components, record form, view form, and edit form, when do we choose what? Is there any guidance on that that we can get?
Yeah, I was expecting that question, so I'm ready with my slide here. So we have three options. We can use the Lightning record form, as I said, or record view form and record edit form. But I suggest if you are accessing the data and you also want to create the records and edit the records, then Lightning record form is the best option to use. But again, if you want to customize your field layout, that can be done if you are using a Lightning record view form or Lightning record edit form there, wherein you can apply your SLDS. And also, if you want to render your record in a custom way, then also these are the two options. But otherwise, you can always choose Lightning record form, which has all the good things that we have in both record view form and record edit form there.
All right, so base components are great, and at the same time, there will be more complicated, complex, or use cases of business logic where you just want to get data and you want to decide how you want to display them. So how can we just get data? How does Lightning Web Components make that an easy process?
That's a good question. As I said, when we use Lightning record form, so it's all fixed layout in which you are showing. Probably you want to do in a more customized way, then the next best option would be to use the wire service. So let's understand what is a wire service first, and then we'll see some examples in our demo there and how to use this wire service. If you see this, you have a Lightning Web Component, which refers to a Lightning UI API module. Right. So in our very first webinar, in our episode 1, we saw that any Lightning Web Component is made up of HTML file and a JavaScript file. And whenever you want to use something, an external JavaScript, or even if you want to use your Lightning element there, you'll have to import it as a module. So you can import this Lightning UI API module in order to access data from the server. So what does this Lightning UI API model consist of? It basically have a bunch of wire adapters, right? When I say wire adapters, it's a small segment of code, and it also has some JavaScript APIs. So you can use the wire adapters to get the data from the server, while you can use these JavaScript APIs if you want to create or edit the data there, right? So how does it all work? So this wire adapter has to be imported in your JavaScript code of your Lightning Web Component. Then wire adapter can get the data from the Lightning or your Salesforce org using your Lightning data service and user API. Once it has the data, it updates either a property or function. Again, it's your choice. I'll show you both the options, how to work with property and function. So once it is updates the property. As we saw in our earlier webinar, where we have used track to make a property reactive. So if you use a track here, it is basically Attwire, in fact, by itself is reactive. So you need not use any track there, right? You can use one decorator there. If you use Attwire decorator, it automatically sends the data to your HTML where you can render it.
Yeah, this visual representation is definitely making things clear. But is it also this complicated when you have to write code for this?
Let's see. I'll show you the syntax first, how we write the wire service. If you see on the top, that on that compartment, that is the syntax. First, you need to import the adapter ID from adapter module. When I say adapter module, it is your UI record API. So once you import that, adapter ID is like a functionality. For one functionality, for each of these functionalities, there are different adapters. You can identify your own adapter for your functionality. For instance, if you want to get the record, so you'll get the adapter ID for get record, and you can use it. And in the syntax, you can see that I'm decorating it with Attwire, which makes this property or function, which you can see in green color, as reactive, right? And it is taking two parameters. One is adapter ID, that is the method or functionality which you are going to call, and adapter configuration is where you can specify any of the fields or any of the configuration you want to send while calling the wire service there. For instance, if you see here in the example below, I'm importing the get record from your Lightning UI record API, and then I'm calling the get record using my @wire service, right, which is my adapter ID, and then I'm sending some configuration parameters like record ID, right, and then it finally it is wired to a property or function. So once that get record returns the value, that value will be assigned to a property here. Here I'm showing it as a property. You can also use a function there. So once it is done, because it is reactive, it automatically updates your component in the HTML part as well.
Yeah, I've always wondered why the service is called wire service. I think it's getting a little clear now, because you're just wiring a property,
right,
to a record or to a response to Lightning data service.
Exactly.
And then it's just connected automatically.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And can we see some real demos? Maybe can we use the recipes app to look at a demo, our favorite recipes app?
Yeah. So now it has become my favorite as well, because most of the times, at least 5 days in a week, I'm using my recipes app there. So yeah, so I'm in the same sample gallery. I took the recipes app from the sample gallery and already deployed on my system, which we learned in my first episode there. We'll see the contacts record where we use the base Lightning components. If I open any of the contacts here, you can see that there are two ways of using the base Lightning component, and we have the dynamic schema, we have the static schema. And when we use the base Lightning components, there are many benefits. For instance, it takes care of the data type. Now, when I click on edit, you can see that I can give the data, or let me remove this email and let me try to save it. It validates. It validates and gives me an error that you have an invalid format there. This all comes out of the box because it is using the Lightning data service and UI API. So let's see how the code looks like for your record form dynamic contact. So let me go to my Visual Code editor. Let us open. In fact, I can take the form. If you want to quickly check, I can just copy the name from here. Let me go here. So let me open record from dynamic contact.html. Let me also open record from dynamic contact.js. So here we are using the Lightning record form, which takes three parameters. One is object API name. The second one is record ID, and the third one is fields which you want to display there, right? And you can see that I'm using a brace here, right? So this is the syntax for getting the property from your JavaScript file. Now, if you go back to your JavaScript file, you can see that this object API name, record ID, and fields should have defined there. So you have record ID and object API name and fields defined here. If you see, I have decorated record ID and object API name with @API decorator. What does this do? It in fact makes your properties as public. So in JavaScript, all the properties are private by default. So when we use @API, it makes it as public. Not only that, it also makes these properties as reactive. And when you put this particular component, use this particular component in any of the pages, record pages there, your record ID and object API name is automatically populated by the record page. So if you put it in your contact record page, so you'll get the object API name as contact, and if you put it in your account record page, you'll get it as an account there. Then I've given an array of fields which I want to display in my record form dynamic contact, right? So this is how it displays the results there. These are very first component session. You can see is only one line of code, and I have not written any kind of Apex in order to retrieve the data from the Salesforce org.
And now I'm curious to look at the static version of it.
Yeah. So if you see the static schema, it is the same form, it is the same set of fields. So let me open this file and show you how the code is done in your static schema. Let me open this. Let us open the record form static contact.html, and we'll open also its JavaScript file. So if you see this HTML file, it is no way different from your record form dynamic contact. It is the same lighting based component which I'm using. If you see here, your record dynamic contact, I'm using the same element even in my static contact here, right? The only difference is in your JavaScript file. If you compare your JavaScript file here, wherein I'm importing each of the fields as a separate module. If you compare it with your static, I'm not doing that here, right? So let's see how we import it. Here we are using at Salesforce schema, from which we are getting the name, we are getting title, phone, and email, and of course account ID as well. And you are using, you can give any name for that matter, right? The best practice would be to give it in capital so that you can easily identify that you are using a field there, right? So I'm using these names, and we have populated an array, and rest of the things work just like your dynamic form. The benefit here is if someone tries to delete this particular field, because it's already defined in the org, you'll see an error. It will not be pushed to the server there. Similarly, if there is a change that is made to your field name on the server, that's also propagated here. So these are the different benefits we get when we get the data in a referential with a referential integrity, right? So we have a referential integrity between your development code and the server. And you know what? This all happens in the development time. So if you are using your dynamic contact, you'll not be able to identify the error until runtime. But in this case, while you're developing the component itself, you'll get to know that you're making some mistake there.
So what happens if somebody tries to delete this field in the Salesforce org?
He gets a message saying that this particular field is being used by a Lightning Web component and he cannot delete it.
So that helps it easy to make sure that your code is not breaking. Right?
Exactly.
Which is super useful, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, all these are amazing, and sometimes even data service might not cut the deal. So what do we do in that kind of case? Is there a way to work with our favorite good old friend Apex?
Yeah. So even before going to the Apex part, I was talking about the wire service, right? So we can also use wire service to get the data. So here in this case, we saw how to use the base lightning components. So let's first see the wire service and how to get the data using the wire service. If you see at the bottom of my contacts, there's another version where I'm just showing the information about this contact. Let's see the code, how it works. Let's go back to our Visual Studio Code environment, wherein I'll open the HTML file for my wire record static contact, and then let me also open the JavaScript file for that. Fine. So let's see how it works, starting from the wire service. If you go back to your slide there, let me go back to my slide once to quickly show you the syntax. So I said we can use the @wire, right, in your JavaScript file in order to bind it, wire it to a property. Let's see how we are doing it in our code here. So let's go to the JavaScript first in this case. And you can see that I'm using the Lightning Record API to get the data from the server, right? And I'm going to use two methods, get record and get field value, right? So this get record, you can see when I hover here, it also gives me all the properties or all the attributes that it takes and also the return values, And here I've statically imported my name field, title field, phone field, and email field, just like we have done in your base lightning components there. And then this is the code which I need to write. That's it. So here we are using atwire service, and get record is your adapter ID, and we are sending a record ID there, right? As the property, these are the configuration property, and also what are the fields which we want to populate. So once this wire service returns, it in fact, because it is wired to this property contact, the contact will have the complete list of records that are returned. In this case, we are only getting one contact, right? So we are using get record method, so which returns only one contact. And let's see how this contact is used in our HTML. You can see that I'm using the HTML directives if true, right? So we can take when we get the contact as an object, this returns both the data as well as error, right? If you have a contact with that particular ID, it returns the contact information. If it is not there, in that case, it returns the error. So what we can do here is we can use if true to get the contact. If the data is there, then I'm printing the values name and title, of course, phone as well as email. You can see that I've also formatted using other base lightning components there. And these things I've defined in my JavaScript as get name, title, phone, email. You can define the properties here, or if you want, you can directly define your getter methods, just like how we would have done it in our Visual Force as well earlier, right? So we are displaying these values here, and if the contact if we do not get any contact data there, in that case we are checking the error and we can display an error message. And this is how the wire service works, Shashank. Yeah, and you were asking about the Apex methods. Let me throw a little light on that.
Is it also as simple as just wiring a method?
No, yeah, almost, but yeah, wiring is much simpler than anything else.
Yes.
Right. So let's see how we can call the Apex methods directly from your Lightning Web Components. So whenever you want to call the Apex methods from your Lightning Web Components, first you need to import those Apex methods in the JavaScript file of your Lightning Web Component. Once you import an Apex method, right, so it is treated as a function, a JavaScript function, so that you can call those functions directly from your JavaScript, right? So how do you call the function? For this, you have two choices. You can use the wire service to call the function, or you can call the Apex method imperatively, right? So when you use again, there may be a question like when to use the wire service, when to call the method imperatively, right? So you would have noticed even in our earlier releases, we got one annotation for the one property for the Aura enabled annotation, where we can set the cacheable to true. Do you remember that, Shashank?
I do, yes.
Yeah. So when we said that, it in fact caches the data, right? So when we are trying to refer to the same record again, it's not going to send a server call, right? So we need to enable that cacheable to true if you are using the wire service. So you can only call the Apex methods for which there is an annotation at Aura enabled and cacheable set to true. But in case of imperative calling, there's no restriction. We only need to make at Aura enabled, and you can call the method. You need not make the cacheable true. But of course, if you have the cacheable true, then you can call it using either wire service or imperatively, right? And when you call it using wire service, again, you have two options to do. You can wire the Apex method, whatever it returns. You can wire it to a property, or you can also wire it to a function, right? So let's see how we can call Apex method using wire service. So again, this is the syntax. So if you notice, the syntax is very much similar to what we have done in our via UI API. The only thing is here we are getting the Salesforce Apex and the Apex method. Let's see how with an example. If you see this example, the first thing you need to do is you need to import. In our case, I'm importing contact controller.find contact, right? So if you want, so whatever method you want to use from your Apex class, you have to write the import statement for each of those methods there. And then once it is imported, you can call that Apex method from your wire service, right? And if that Apex method takes any parameters, then you can set the parameters in your configuration there. So you have a JavaScript object in which you can give name value pairs. For instance, here I'm searching for I'm giving a search key. So whatever user is searching for, I'll get those contacts list. And then that can be assigned to again, just like your earlier wire adapter, you can assign it to a property or a function.
So technically, I don't see any difference in the way you use wire, whether it's Lightning Data Service or an Apex method.
Right.
You're just you're importing an adapter, which is a method here, and then firing it to contact and giving it config, which is the parameters.
Exactly.
So function mechanism is exactly the same.
Right.
Only difference is that you're using Apex methods instead of Lightning Data Service.
Right.
I really like this, but yeah, there might be again situations where wiring to a property is probably not enough.
Yeah.
Right. So like the imperative way that you're talking about, can you show more light on that?
Sure. Now let's see how we can we can call the Apex methods imperatively, right? So for that again, so you need to import the module. Now that we should have digested by this time, Shashank. So whatever we want to use, we are going to import it first, and then we are going to use it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so here I'm importing a method called getContactList from the contact controller class. But if you have a namespace, you can also give namespace dot class name dot method name there. So once you have imported, you can just call it. So as I said, when you import an Apex method, it works like a JavaScript function. And you know that whatever I'm currently displaying here is a JavaScript, right? So I'm just calling the getContactList function from there. Once I do that, in the imperative case, what it does is it returns a JavaScript promise. You can see this is a JavaScript promise, which has two parts. You can access the result if we get a proper result. So we are using dot then notation and accessing the result. And then you can set this result to any of the parameters here. You have a context parameter for which you have set a track decorator, which means you are making it as reactive. If that changes, that change will automatically be available in your HTML file. Right. So similarly, if you have an error, I'm setting this in the error and I can access it in my HTML file. I'll show you like with a proper example in our demo there.
Yeah, can't wait to see the demo.
Yep. So let's go. Now let's see how we can work with multiple records. In our earlier case, we have used the base Lightning component record form and a wire adapter using UI API to get just one record, right? Now in this case, you can get the multiple records. Let's see how it works. Let's go back to our browser here. Let's go to the Apex tab. Now, because we are working with Apex, so you can find all the examples related to the Apex in the Apex tab. That's what I most like about the recipes app. Look, whatever, maybe I want to check the Aura interoperability. Maybe I want to work on the event. So I can go to any of those tabs and find the example and see the code there, right from there. You can see the view source as well. Okay, let me take this very first component, Apex wire method to property, where I want to get the data from the server by using the Apex method there. And once I get the Apex method, I want to assign it to the property. Let's see how it works. Let me again go back to my environment. And probably I don't need the earlier files. Let me open a new file here for the Apex wire method property. Let me open the HTML file and also open the JavaScript file for that. Okay, so if you see the JavaScript, looks simple code, right? Yeah, I love it basically. Let's see how it gets the data. Now in this case, I'm importing it using same Salesforce/Apex, and I'm giving namespace.contact. So say if the namespace is a default namespace, which is C, right? You need not give the namespace here. You can directly give the class name dot method name. And once you get this method, you can give any name here. Basically, I'm just giving the same name so that I can easily understand. And give any name here. And if you hover, it also gives you the syntax, what it does. It gives what is the name of the method, and it also gives what is the return type. In this case, it returns a whatever property value. And then I'm assigning that to contacts here. And if you see, go back here, it is the same code which you saw in our earlier, but in this case, I want to display a list of values rather than one record. So I'm seeing if the contacts.data is true, that is, I have some data in my contacts property, then I'm using a directive called for each to iterate through my contacts. And for each of the contact, I'm just printing the name there. There's the final output which you are seeing there. Right? Is it not easy?
It seems pretty simple to me, at least.
Right. So now let's go back and let's see one more example where I want to wire this apex method to a function rather than a property. So now if you see here, let me copy this. If you see in this code, so I'm just populating the contacts and I'm handling it here, right? The data and error. So I can even do it in a function. So even before sending it to the HTML, if I want to do some pre-processing and then send it to the HTML, in that case, I can use this the version of wiring your apex method to a function. Let me open the HTML file for you and also the JavaScript file. Fine. If you see this JavaScript file now, so again, as usual, I'm getting the module, I'm importing the module, and here, if you observe this syntax, right? So here I'm calling this apex method called getContactList, and then whatever is returned, I'm assigning it to a function here. If you see, this is the function. Right, so which is getting an object filled with both error and data. If there is a data, then I'm updating my contacts with the data and setting error as undefined. And if there is an error, I'm setting the error there and setting the contacts as undefined. If you go back here, so it is a similar code wherein I'm getting all the contacts. I'm just displaying the name here. Right? If I get the contacts data, I'm displaying the name. If there is an error set, I'm just showing the error. Now I'm not processing the data on the markup side, rather I'm processing the data on the JavaScript side. Right? So this is a very good example of how to wire your apex method to a property and also how to wire your apex method to a function there. Right? I was also talking about how to use the how to call the apex methods imperatively. In the case of wire service, your wire method will be called whenever you mutate the data or whenever you search. If you, in fact, I'll show with another example where you can also make the such term as dynamic. But let's see how we can do it using the imperative method first. So in this case, we'll have to specifically trigger the call to the server, for which I'm using a load contacts button. If I click this load contacts button, you can see that it makes a server call specifically and gets my list of records. So this is the functionality for my apex imperative method component. So let's see this component, how it works. If you go back to our VS Code environment, so I want to show you apex imperative method.html. Let me open that and also open apex imperative method.javascript file. Okay, cool. Now if you see here, so let's see from the HTML. Here I'm triggering the action from my load contacts button, right? So if you go back to the code in HTML, you can find the load contacts button here. Whenever I click that load contacts button, it is calling a handle load. And here I'm using the HTML event, so on click event. So someone clicks that button, it calls the handle load. If you go back to your JavaScript method, so handle load is a method. This method is invoked, in which I'm calling the get contacts list. Now, as I said, when we import the apex method here, it will work like a JavaScript function, and I'm calling a JavaScript function here. And I also said, when we call the apex methods imperatively, you are going to it's going to return a promise. So here it returns a promise, and if we get a result, in that case I'm setting the contact with the result, and if I get an error, I'm setting it with an error. And again, if you go back to your markup, you're seeing if you got the contacts record, you are displaying the values here. If you don't get the contacts record, you're displaying the error.
This looks pretty interesting, but there is also some questions also coming in about how to use parameters in Apex methods. How do we do that?
Yeah, I'll show you. Probably, yeah, I have one component just adjacent to my Apex imperative method where I can use the parameters as well. Let us say I want to search for a particular record, for a particular contact, say Amy. You can see it's dynamically searching and it is giving name there. If I just put A here, it gives all the names which has A in it, right? Let's see how it works. So let me open that file for you. So let us open Apex wire method with parameters.html where we have the markup, and we'll also open the JavaScript file for the same. Here we have the JavaScript file. Let's see what we are doing there. In your component here, you are typing something in an input text box, right? And it gets the information from the JavaScript file where it makes a call to the Apex method and gets the information. Let's see. If you see here, so I have a lightning input, right, in which I'm accepting the value from the end user, and I'm setting it to the search key property, which is defined in my JavaScript file. If you go here, I have a JavaScript file, so in which I have search key, right, and then I also have a @wire method, right, which is called to get the contacts. But when it is called, how it is called, right? So in order to make a call to that, probably I can use a handle key event or some kind of event to call it. So again, if you see here, so I don't have any buttons, right? So I don't have anything to click and then call it. So what we have done here is we have made one of the parameters, the search key parameter, as dynamic parameter. If you see here, I have a dollar symbol, right? So there's a dollar symbol. So what it does is, if there is a change in your search key, like let us say if someone pressed a character there, so it is going to make a call to the wire adapter, and it's going to make a call to find contacts. But how does this value change? Again, if you go back here, so for this search key, you can see on change, I'm making a call to my JavaScript file method called handle key change. So in this handle key change method, I'm getting the event value, event target value, and updating the search key. So whenever the search key is updated, because I'm using a dollar symbol here, so and it is dynamic, so this gets mutated, right? So in that case, it calls the wire service, which in turn calls your find contacts and get the complete contact information. And whatever is written, we are storing it in a contacts property here. And because it is wired and it is reactive, your contacts will be automatically updated, and then you can process your contact as usual, as we have done in our earlier components, and display the name. If you get an error, you can just display the error as well.
Sounds good. And there is also a question about how do you do imperative Apex with parameters. You have all these examples in the recipes that you can anytime go to and check out. Now, there is one more important aspect, Satya, of using components in Salesforce, working with data, that is configuring them for the app builder. When you talk about, when you look at Aura, Aura has this design file where you can actually put in configuration, and it shows up as properties in the Lightning App Builder that the admin can use to customize how the component works in the app builder, right? So how can we do that for LWC too? And how do we do that?
Yeah, we can do that with LWC in a much simpler way. And let me show that. Let me go back to your component library and let's see how we can compose that. But before that, I have one question here, Shashank. Like while I was presenting, I was also having a look at the Q&A there, so that if I see something interesting. So someone has posted a question there. So how we would develop the same thing if if we would use it in your Aura programming model and Visual Force programming model. And yeah, that has been my favorite way. And wherever possible, I was trying to create a presentation for that, a demo for that, where we can quickly compare so that it will be easy for the people to understand.
In fact, I actually had the same question, but I forgot about it. Thanks for somebody from the audience who actually reminded us that.
Yeah, cool. So if you see here, I have a quick comparison of how we would get the contacts if you are using the contacts controller. If you see back, if you see your earlier code here, so in all the cases, I'm getting the contact controller from which I'm calling the method, and this contact controller is like any Apex method. So this is the contacts controller, which if you see, it has some methods with Aura enabled stuff there. But let's start with the VF contact list page and see how it access the contacts controller there. So as you all know, we use the attribute called controller to assign, to work with your custom controller, right? So if it's a standard controller, we say the standard controller and directly call it. So in this case, I'm calling the contact controller, and from that contact controller, I'm trying to get the contacts list, right? If you see here, so I want to get the contacts list. So I have a getter for that, so which runs a SOQL query and returns the contact list, which I'm getting in my Visual Force page, and I'm just processing it and showing the values. This is how it works in Visual Force, right? The same thing if you do in your Aura component. In the Aura component case, again, I'm using the controller attribute in my component element, and then here contact controller is what I've already written in the Apex. In fact, I made sure that, so in all the three examples, we are referring to the same controller to make a point that we are not going to change the controllers. We are still going to use your Apex methods. You already have the controllers written in your projects there. You can still use the controllers. Now I'm using the contact controller here, and then I'm using alright, I'm having a init method. Let me show you this init method is called from your Aura contact controller.js. Doing it here, we are trying to call the get contact list, and notice that here I'm using the namespaces c dot to refer to the controller, server side controller in this case, and I'm setting it as action, and I'm setting a asynchronous callback method, right, where I'm calling that method, and whenever that is returned, so we are setting those values. So we are enqueuing the action. Whenever it is returned, we are setting those values to v.contacts with that return value. And finally, you can use those contacts information here, right? And the same thing if you see the Apex wire method to property.html. So here is the same program we just discussed about, right? So here if you see the JavaScript file, I'm using the @wire get contact list, which is populating the contacts. Again, I'm importing the contact controller like any other ECMA module. Okay, so this is the HTML part, and like once we have contacts, so we can just display the values by using your if true. We can check whether we have the data there, then we can display the value, right? But whether this is Apex wire method to property.html, which is Lightning Web Component, or your Aura or your VF Visual Force, all are referring to the same controller. And you can see this controller, each of these methods of this controller are annotated with @Aura enabled cacheable equal to true, so that we can make it available even in our wire service. As if you remember, so that's what is mandatory for the wire service.
Great, thank you so much, Satya, for this super useful comparison.
Yeah.
It's app builder time now.
Yeah, it's app builder time. Now we have built the components. We have used the Apex there. We are getting the data from the Salesforce. Now, how to compose the components? How to compose a page using your components? For that, so the administrator's most favorite tool, App Builder, right? We can use that Lightning App Builder to compose the pages with our Lightning Web Components. So what are the specific things that we need to configure in order to make our Lightning Web Component available in the Lightning App Builder so that your administrator can use it? Okay, now if you see this Lightning App Builder, if you want to use your Lightning Web Component there, you'll have to set one of the elements called enabled to true in your metadata file. If you properly remember from your even episode 1. So these are the 3 important files. We have HTML file, JavaScript file, and the meta file, right, where we configure it. So we can set it there, and then we can also set the different types of Lightning pages like record page, home page, or app page there. And then you can also give some design properties so that administrator can dynamically build the pages and configure it as per his requirements. We'll see all of these things in our demo there. But yeah, you can also restrict your component to a particular subject if you want to.
Are you showing us the demo now?
Yeah, I'm going to show you the demo. Let's go there and let me show you the demo. If we go to this composition where we have different examples, we are going to talk about other compositions where intercomponent communication or next webinars, future webinars. But if you see this bottom component, let me show it with an example. Here I'm just showing some pick list value as option 1, some string value and some number value there. Maybe administrator want to dynamically configure this and give different values. Let's see how we can do that. For that, we can click on setup, go to edit page so that it launches the Lightning App Builder for you. Once it launches the Lightning App Builder, then you can go to the particular component and click on that component. In this case, I'm clicking this component. On the right side, you can see the properties, right? So I can set, instead of option 1 from the pick list, I can select option 2, right? Or I want to make, I want to type something here. I want to say episode 2, right? I can do that. And you can see that when I do that, those values are automatically getting updated in my sample data here. And probably when I leave this app builder and see my original page, I can see the same thing there. Not only that, in number value, let me enter say 120. Oops, I got an error here. It says this value must be at least 0 and at most 100. So this is validation which we can give in the design properties when you're using the integers there. So let me keep it to 20 for now. And let us save it, and let's go back, and you can see that the component is back here. When in the error case, it doesn't show the component. So okay. Yeah, when you go back, you can see our latest, like as per the administrator's requirement, you can see the page there. Do you want to see the code, Shashank?
I can't wait to see the code.
Yeah, let's go. So let me open this component code. Let us close the existing component. So if you see here, I can open the HTML file for this. I can also open the JavaScript file. Now, because we are also going to work on metadata, I'm also going to open the metadata file for you. Right. So here, how do we give the properties? If you see the metadata file, this is what we have discussed even in our earlier webinars. Because I've set it to true, my component is available in my Lightning App Builder. I would have set it to false, it would not have been available there. And then I can use targets here to set up the pages for which the component should be made available. Like currently I'm making it available only to app page and home page, but not record page. But if you want to show it for record page, you can do that. Then in the target config, you can specify the properties for each of these pages. So here I'm giving the properties in general for both the app page and home page. But if you want to give the properties, separate properties for the app page and the different properties for the home page, that also you can do it by giving separate configuration. So here I'm using both the pages. You can in fact divide it into one more target config for the home page separately. But if you see here, so I have the pick list values, option 1, option 2, option 3. That is what I was able to see in the Lightning App Builder. Right, and I also have a string type property where it was showing type something here, where I typed episode 1 in my app builder, right? And this is the third one where I given 120 and it throws an error, right? So that's because it has a minimum value set and it has a maximum value set. So we need to enter any value between minimum and maximum. Okay. So this is how we set the properties. But in order to make it available in your component, you'll have to define these properties as public properties in your JavaScript file. You can see that. Once they're defined as public properties, they are anyway reactive and they are available in your app builder. This is the code which you are seeing in your main component, markup code, and we are able to see that. Is it not interesting?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is pretty much what I'm looking for actually.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I think we have pretty much come to an end of our content for today. Thank you so much for listening to us, for watching the webinar, and please do watch out for our next episodes. Episode 3, we're going to talk about component communication and Aura interoperability. And we just posted a link for you to register for episode 3. The link can be found inside the chat. We just pinged it. So please feel free to just join on register for episode 3 where we talk about interoperability with Aura and events communication and PubSub communication and stuff. Lots of interesting demos as well in store for you. And after that, this is again 2 weeks from now. The next Friday is going to be episode 3. And after that will be episode 4. We'll talk about security and testing, some interesting important concepts like testing, locker service, how to use external JavaScript and how to access external APIs and stuff. And with that, we'll go into episode 5 after that and do a live coding scenario. Right, so we'll build something live during the webinar, something interesting that will help you understand how it feels to actually build Lightning component.
That's going to be more interesting.
It's going to be my favorite episode for sure, and it's going to be a very fitting finale and a great climax to our web series. Right, and then also look at testing and debugging and talk a little bit about Aura migration and stuff like that. So once that is done, we'll be done with our webinar. But at the same webinar series, at the same time, you don't have to stop learning. You can start keep learning as we go. That can be done through obviously our favorite place, Trailhead. We actually have a module called Modern JavaScript for you that you can actually learn from. It has nothing to do with LWC. It's just about how JavaScript has evolved into a modern language. And we also have our trail mix, salesforce.co/LWC, the most easiest to remember URL that I've ever seen. That will give you like all step-by-step instructions of how to build Lightning components and more modules on how to, understanding about Lightning components and stuff like that. There are people who are asking at their tutorials that we can follow step by step. You can find them in the trail mix here. Just go to salesforce.co/LWC. With that, let's go into the Q&A, and please remember towards the end, you're going to get a survey that you can fill to let us know how it went. You can also stay in touch with us in our Trailblazer community group, bit.ly/webinar in APAC. We just pinged that as well in the chat so that you can join it and stay in touch with our upcoming webinars. With that, let's go into the Q&A. Thank you so much for people who have been hearing until now. For the rest of the time, we'll do Q&A of the questions that have been asked. Are you ready, Satya?
Yeah, we are good.
All right. So there are some questions around can LAS be used to display multiple records?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Yeah, we can do that, but it's still in beta. So we have one component for getting the list of records and displaying there. You can try that.
Okay, there is a question around what is meant by UI API.
UI API, as the name suggests, it's user interface API, wherein as I was talking in my slide presentation there, you can use the UI API to make calls to the server, which takes care of your security and the CRUD permissions and returns the records accordingly.
Okay, so can we use more than one Apex controller in Lightning Web Components?
Okay, that's an interesting question. We can always do that. We can, in fact, import for each of the methods of each of the Apex controllers there.
So there is no restriction on only one controller anymore?
No.
That's very good news.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the difference between @track and @API?
Okay, so basically when we define properties in JavaScript, all the properties are private by default. right? And then you want to make that particular property as reactive, that is something changes on the JavaScript side, right? You want to reflect that change in your markup, then we use attract there, right? And at API is where we can make that property as public. If you make it, if you decorate that property with with that API, it becomes public, and of course all public properties are reactive. So the thing is, if you want to keep it as private but make it available to the markup, then use attract. But if you want to make it public so that other components can also use it, then use at API there.
So we were showing static and dynamic schema. Which one do you suggest, and when should we use static versus when should we use dynamic?
Yeah, if you ask me that question, then I suggest you always go for static, because that gives you a better control on your code. You can identify any errors during the development time itself. But yeah, if you want to have a flexible coding and you want to get the complete information at once without really knowing about all the fields there, then probably you can go for dynamic. But static is the best option where you have better control.
Okay, so when do we call Apex method? When do we wire Apex to function versus wire Apex to a property?
Again, that is the developer's choice. So basically, if you have a simple use case, then you wire your Apex method to property so that you have the property value, and you're not doing too much of the logic on the markup side. But if you want to do some apply some logic here, internal logic here on the JavaScript code even before it is sent to the markup, then you go and bind it to the function there.
Okay, let's see some more questions here. A lot of questions. Thank you so much, guys, for so many questions. Let's see anything that is the most relevant to our topics today. Let me look at. So can we will it work only for S objects, or can we use it for wrappers as well?
We can use it for wrappers as well.
And when these server calls are made, what approach does Apex, LWC follow? Is it synchronous or asynchronous?
It is asynchronous.
Okay.
Okay.
So how do you set the data source for the property?
Actually, you're asking questions which are like one-word answers for me, so you made my life easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes or no, synchronous or asynchronous. So thank you so much, guys. The questions are awesome. I think there are quite a few more questions as well. Let's see anything else which is the most relevant. So do we always need to define all the fields that we need, or can we just all the fields in an object at once?
You'll have to define each of the fields just like you do in your SOQL query. We don't have anything like star there, right? So whatever fields you're retrieving is in the SOQL query, those fields have to be defined in your JavaScript as well, and then use it.
Sounds good. So there are some questions around what is the best debugging tool and stuff like that, which we are going to talk about in the 5th episode. There's questions around can we use it inside Aura with Aura and stuff, which we'll talk about in the next episode. Yeah. So there are episodes coming up where we will talk about relevant stuff. Let's see. Is it possible to retrieve a list of records in a single wire call?
Yeah, we can get the list of records in a single wire call there. Yeah, we can also wire it to Apex method and do it. And I was seeing one more question here. What is the IDE which we are using here? It is VS Code for your information, and it has all the features which are really helpful while you develop the Lightning Web components.
Yep, VS Code is our recommended and officially supported IDE, text editor, code editor, what you call it, because we actually build extensions, Salesforce extensions for Visual Studio Code. So it has to be your go-to IDE for Salesforce development. You're free to choose your tool, but this is the most recommended one.
So okay. I have one question here. Why the field variable is not decorated with @ symbol? So field, basically we have 3 decorators. We can use @track, @wire, and @API.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, we've come to an end. Thank you so much for the amazing questions, guys. And thank you so much, Satya, for patiently answering all the questions. You will receive a survey that you can answer and let us know how you thought the webinar went. We are listening to your feedback to make it better for you. With that, we have come to an end. Thank you so much, and see you in episode 3 in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, thank you all for taking your time on this Friday and attending this webinar to more learn about Lightning Web Components. So stay tuned. We are coming with very good content even in our future webinars.
Three more to go.